You know, it's kind of crazy having a boring life. It's crazy because there have been times in my life which weren't boring at all because they were difficult. And lately, it just isn't that way anymore. Things just seem like they work out pretty well. I don't really have problems. And I don't think too much about what I'm gonna do every day. I don't worry about stuff not going the way I want it to or need it to. I just kind of chill out and go to work every day, work at a desk. Sometimes I'll go do something that's a little bit more interesting to a point, but for the greater part, my job is pretty predictable. Life is pretty predictable. There's just not all that much going on. And one day flows into the next, and there's just not much to report, you know? Alarm clock goes off at 7 o'clock, and I get up and make the coffee, go to work, do the desk job, get off at 5, go for a walk, make some dinner, check YouTube to see what's going on in the news, maybe watch a few videos about some kind of thing going on in politics or something going on in gaming or something like news about the hurricanes going through Florida these days. If anybody is in the Florida area, I'm sorry and hope things go well for you. And it's just kind of a simple deal. And it's interesting how little things can wind up taking a long time. You know, I have this friend, and speaking to him, I should probably go say hi because it's been a while. But he and his wife just live off in this little cabin outside of town. And if you ever go visit them, they're retired. They got nothing going on. And you pour a cup of coffee, sit down for dinner, talk about something random, and next thing you know, 6 hours have gone by. And that's the whole point of it, you know? Life's just pretty much a problem-free philosophy, right? It's kind of interesting, though, how you go through life fighting all these different things and worrying about stuff, and then when you get through it and you're on the other side, like there's no problems, you know? And like I was thinking about this storm going through, and maybe this is a little bit irreverent to say this, but it's true. You know, people go down and they get a house right on the banks of some river in an area that floods every year and gets storms all the time. And then it gets treated like it's a surprise when something bad happens and you see their house floating down in a heavy current. Now, tragedy in any living form is something we should be empathetic about, of course, but it's interesting how so many people wind up setting themselves up for failure because they don't really avoid problems on any level. They just let them happen. And then they have to deal with all of those things whenever the challenges come. And you just don't have to necessarily live your life that way. Sometimes life will throw problems at you, and you never know when that's going to happen. And when it does, you got to buck up and deal with it. That's true. But for some people, it's not like a occasional thing. It's an everyday thing. It's all the time. Like, just they're never not having some kind of a trouble, you know? And it's really interesting how some people always have problems and some people never really have problems. And then those same people, the people who don't really have problems, sometimes they do, but they usually don't make a big deal out of it. They just deal with it. They do what they got to do. They power through it. Sometimes they suffer silently, but you know, they're too busy just doing what they need to do. to draw attention to their troubles. And for a lot of those people, the people who kind of prepare on the front side, they tend to get through their problems pretty quick. It's a, it's a temporary struggle, and then they come through on the other side and they're okay again. And there's something to be said, though, for if you want to have a good life, have simpler desires, have simpler things that you're chasing. Don't worry so much about everything, and then you can kind of have anything you want. That's just how life tends to work. And for me, life just flows by pretty simply these days. Now, I'll admit, sometimes life feels like it's too easy, too simple, because you get used to navigating troubles, and then you just don't necessarily know how to, I guess, get off the ground. And that's a whole nother thing. Life can be too quiet. It can be too lonely sometimes. Like sometimes I think about how if I was going to tell somebody, what is it about my life that's interesting? I don't know. Like, I just do my thing, Like, there's things that interest me, don't get me wrong. Like, I can wind up watching videos about, something going on in the news or something for a while and start to get interested in that, or, watch some gaming channel that I think is interesting, or read about some new game that's going to come out, or sit around and play Black Desert Online for 6 hours and try to figure out how to craft a fishing pole. I don't know. But none of it seems like it's all that noteworthy when it comes to telling other people about it. And I think people are so interested in being impressed and in trying to impress others. It's awful hard to really get along with people when everyone's trying to measure themselves up against one another the way folks are wont to do. But the fact that you have a good life should be enough, I think. I think in a world filled with people that are so haunted by so many things, having a good life is something that you should be proud of. If you're privileged enough to be at a good place in life, don't ever feel like you aren't good enough or something like that. Because, I think about how there's so many people driving, they're driving nice pickup trucks around, and they're swiping credit cards all over the place to pay for things they can't afford. And, it would seem like they're living life in the fast lane, wouldn't it? But the reality is they're just trying to keep their head above water. They're trying to not fall behind. They're trying to feel like they have something that they can show for their life. They're trying to not be judged by their neighbors and their friends and everybody else. They're just kind of haunted all the time, and people have so much going on, and quite often they don't have good fundamentals to back it up at all. They're they're not in a good place. And so if you just are above water, like you don't have demons in your closet, you don't have secrets that you wouldn't want other people to know, you don't have outrageous debts, you just live your life and you are who you are, genuinely and authentically, you have something that most people don't have. So remember that. And if you're not there, then get there. I remember when I had credit card debts and stuff, I just felt like if I could get to zero, I would be good. Like that would be like winning the lottery. Just to not owe anybody anything and have a positive net worth. That to me would have felt incredible if I could have just done that. But at that time, it just didn't feel attainable. Didn't feel attainable just to get above, the negative. And, like now I'm not in that situation, but then, you start to think, well, how much is enough? And there's never a point where you can say enough you have enough. I guess you're always trying to get a bit more, but you can get to a point where you meet a certain threshold where life is okay. You know, like I was watching a video, and this person said if you have $10,000, you're basically reach a threshold. At that point, you've reached a threshold where pretty much anything that happens, a random life thing that happens, like you have to pay the deductible for your insurance, or an unforeseen car repair comes up, or whatever it might be, if you have $10,000, then you're at a point where most of the things that you would want to do or need to do, they are a choice, and you're able to make that choice based on what you feel is best for you. And you're not in a situation where you're not able to make the choice because you just physically don't have the resources you need to do that. And that's you know, that's a really important distinction, I think, because you know, a lot of people just live their life kind of living paycheck to paycheck, one problem to the next, and they never manage to get out of that. So just try to get to the point where you're, you know, you're at that point. And then I think if you can do that, then, you know, then at that point you're in a pretty good place. And then, yeah, it doesn't mean that you don't have goals to progress, but you stop worrying so much about it. It's kind of like what is Endgame in a game like you know, like this, like BDO or some other game? Well, there's Endgame in the sense that like you've got to the absolute max gear cap and you're able to take on top tier players, and you're at the top of an arena leaderboard or whatever it is. And maybe to get there, you have to do pretty incredible things, I guess, to get there. It might be a very, very long grind for you to get to that extreme end game. But then there's the lower level of an end game where you get to, you know, a fully leveled character. You've unlocked all of the basic content of the game. You've completed like the main story quest, for example. You've unlocked all of the maps and the areas. You're strong enough to go wherever you want and pretty much do any of the content that you feel you would like to do. Well, right. Well, that is basically, you know, that's easy for somebody to get to, right? Like there's the grind where a person can grind in a game for maybe 3 months, maybe, you know, if that, maybe not even anywhere near that long. Just, you know, a few hours of casual play every day, and after a little while, the average player gets to the point where they have reached that cap, to where they're in a good place. They can play every day. They can play casually. They don't really need to do anything more to fully enjoy everything the game has to offer. And if you can get to that point, then you can let off the gas, and then you just do new content if and when it may come, and you don't worry too much about any of that. You just hang out and enjoy the atmosphere of where you're at. And I just think it's so important to get to a point where, you know, you climb to the mountain, you get to the top. It doesn't mean that you're never going to go on another adventure again. It doesn't mean that you're not going to do anything else after that. But you get to a point where you say, okay, I've got there, I'm good. And that shouldn't be your entire life that you spend seeking. You know, like if you're you know, you're young, you're 18 years old, you haven't got your life figured out, you know, and you're working through things, and you've got trauma and you have trouble and different things on your mind that you're trying to figure out in life. Well, that's okay. But, you know, fast forward another decade or two, well, like at some point, your life, you need to figure it out. Because, you know, if you're in your 30s and you still haven't figured out how to just have a good attitude with life and be at peace with the life you have, well, you know, I don't know what to tell you. You know, like that's not a thing where you need to grow into it. It's something where you just need to figure it out and lay that to rest so that you can move on. You know, same thing whether it's your finances or, you know, in a game or whatever it is. Like, You really just need to get to a point where you're good. And you know, I remember a Josh Strife Hayes video. He was talking about people who will say a game gets good after 200 hours, and then he went on to elaborate. You know, in 200 hours, you could watch multiple entire TV shows, like whole series you could watch beginning to end. And then there's people that'll say, well, you know, you got to play this MMO for 200 hours, and after around 200 hours, it'll get good. Oh, no. I mean, like at some point, like maybe it needs to be good from the beginning, right? Like it needs to be, like you can't spend your whole life trying to get to level 1, right? And I think a lot of people do that, though, you know? And then to kind of pivot and talk about gaming, just because, you know, I've been thinking a lot about BDO lately because I've been playing it and experiencing the game and stuff. I think it's interesting how people are very critical of Black Desert Online. Like there's just a lot of critical content about the game out there. And if you look at content creators and what they're doing, what they're talking about, it tends to be a lot of content that's very mind-numbing, and I don't even understand what I'm listening to. It's people that are ranting about something to do with PvP, something to do with the end game, whatever it might be. You know, I don't know really what it is because I'm new to the game, right? Like I just, you know, I don't necessarily understand a lot of the game mechanics. Like I'm a pretty simple casual player. I mostly just gather stuff, quest, and run around. Like that's my idea of a good time in an MMO, and probably, you know, playing around with chatting to people in the global chat. Like that's probably the end game to me, you know? So like, I just don't really care too much. But the bottom line is there's a lot of really critical people out there who are frustrated about all kinds of things in the game. And then I look at the game as a new player and I think, you know, I don't exactly know what it is that they're raging about, because from my perspective, it seems like the monetization is very fair. It seems like the lore is pretty good. It seems like the world is pretty cool. You know, there's just a lot of different things about the game that I think are pretty cool. And, you know, I'm just not really seeing the reason why so many people are just frustrated about some random thing. And so few people are just talking about the basic obvious thing. Like it's a really pretty game, you know, it's a cool game to be part of the world of, right? So why isn't there more just explore and smell the roses and just enjoy the atmosphere of the game? You know, why isn't there more of that and less of the toxic, frustrated players that are just raging because I'm assuming that they spent thousands of hours in the game and just burned themselves out, and now they're fully obsessed with trying to min-max, and then they're mad because of some more or less trivial mechanics that are in their minds ruining the game. Like, I don't know that it's a bad game. It's probably a pretty good game. If you step away and you're not paying attention to all of the frustrated content creators and people who have probably spent too much time in the game, to be honest, and that's why they're frustrated. Not to say that there aren't valid concerns about some aspects of the game which are probably late game that I haven't even encountered yet or possibly never will encounter. But it doesn't change the fact that there's people who will be raging about things because their perspective is very obsessive, and they're never going to be in a position where they feel like, you know, enough is enough, and they can just, you know, be at peace with where they're at. They're always trying to get further into the end game and master something that is out of their reach. And if you're always trying to chase something that's out of reach, then you're always going to be unhappy because you'll never be able to acquire it. And that's just a natural part of life. But life should be good, and you shouldn't spend your whole life existing in a state of crisis. And don't let other people's expectations and the fact that other people maybe do live in a state of crisis be a reason for you to feel like you have to be that way too. Like, it's okay to just be at peace with your life. And if you're not there, then don't feel like you have to do something ridiculously monumental to get there. Like, the truth is, you could probably reach a place of peace in your life. If you don't have it, you can probably reach it much more simply, much faster than you would tend to realize. I think about just so many things where you can go from feeling like life is a problem to feeling like life is a blessing so quickly. All it takes is one conversation, one random fork in the road, and suddenly your life will be very different. And I guess I'll pivot now, and I'll talk about something else that's been on my mind, and that is this concept I will call consolidation. It's important to simplify your life, to focus on fewer things. Like, that's one reason why I've spent so much time thinking and talking about what is the best MMO to play, or what is the best game to play, because it's not so much that you can't play more than one game. It's that if you want to immerse yourself in something, the best way to do it is to have a simplicity of focus. So, for example, let's say that I get off work and I think to myself, I'm going to go home and I'm going to play my favorite game. And I just have one favorite game, and that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking, well, what am I going to do in the game today? Well, that's a whole different feeling versus that thought of, oh my goodness, like, okay, I'm going to log into, the Elder Scrolls Online and do a daily. I'm going to log into Genshin Impact and do the daily there, and I'm going to log into Lord of the Rings Online and do my daily there, and I have to, load into City Skylines and play that today because I haven't played that for a little while. Like, you start to have this checklist. You have these things you're going to do. And then that checklist starts to rule you instead of you really enjoying the experience you're having. Like, that's one reason why it's not a good idea to have multiple part-time jobs if you could have one full-time job, right? Because you could go to that one job and maybe you do 60 or 70 hours in a week and you feel like you know exactly what you accomplished, and you feel like you got extra return on investment for that time that you invested into the job you were doing, right? Or you could go to work multiple part-time jobs, and then you could put in just as many hours, but instead of feeling gratified and you feel, happy about the accomplishment that you've made, you feel more frustrated, right? Like, you just feel like you are overextended and you're burned out, and your focus is divided between a lot of different things. It's like in BDO, I've learned there's energy, which you use when you're gathering, and energy is sort of a premium commodity in a way, right? Like, it's a thing where if you were to spend a bunch of your energy gathering up random items that are of no value, you don't need them, and you can't sell them for a significant profit, well, that energy only replenishes slowly over time. So it's not necessarily going to be a very good idea to spend your time gathering things that don't serve a purpose in the marketplace or a service for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish in the game. So do you really want to go out there and gather every single thing that you come across and overload your inventory with it? And the answer is probably not necessarily. You're better off to figure out what is useful to you and then invest more fully in, that one particular thing that you've decided is a good investment for your time or your resources. So having fewer things, it just helps so much with mental health, peace of mind, And it's something that I always keep on going back to, a sort of a minimalism, but not just a minimalism of things, more specifically a minimalization of activities and things that I'm focused on. So I'm going to do the things, I'm going to fulfill my commitments, I'm going to do the things that I need to do, and then I'm going to have a significant amount of time left over that I can spend doing things that I want to do. And then I'm going to have a pretty short list of things that I want to do, and I'm going to try to be fully mindful while I'm doing those things so that I get the most return on investment while I do it. And it's more meditative. If you're doing fewer things, you're thinking about fewer things, you have fewer things on your list to do, then instead of feeling like you're destitute, you wind up feeling like your time is valued, because now you can be more mindful during each individual thing that you are spending time engaged with. So figuring out how to consolidate your life, consolidate your priorities, your focus, all those things, it really can help a lot with getting to a point where you feel like your life is good, is whole, is balanced and complete. And then that leads me to the other thing that's on my mind, and that is the importance of having this space that's not really allocated, right? Because maybe there are things that you want in your life. Maybe it's a new relationship, maybe it's, you know, something that you want to accomplish that you haven't accomplished, and so many different things that maybe you would like to add to your life that you can't add to your life right now, because sometimes we just can't, you know, snap our fingers and then puff, you get what you want right now. You just have to be ready for it. And part of being ready for it is to have room for it. You know, like I love something I heard before. Somebody said, if you want a new relationship and you're single, then why don't you start by clearing out your closet and clear out half the closet so that there's room. You know, like imagine, like let's say you were in a relationship, then you'd have your spouse or your girlfriend or whatever it might be would move in there, and then, you know, she'd have her stuff in the closet, right? So how would she put her stuff in the closet if you have your closet full of all of your old clothes? So simplify some of that, you know, make some space. And you know, like for me, like, you know, I'm single right now, and so, you know, I don't decorate the bedroom really. Like I mean, like there's stuff in there to a point, but it's, you know, it's not filled with a lot of stuff. Like some of the areas of my living space aren't overly congested with things because, you know, there's stuff I do want. You know, like I've got my, you know, figurines and collectibles and some gaming stuff and some movie memorabilia and other things I think are cool. You know, I've been collecting those things, but then other areas I'll leave those empty and leave the space, because I wouldn't want to, you know, try to, you know, integrate somebody else into my life when I don't have room in my life for somebody else, right? And that kind of a mindset, I think that that's healthy, and it's just important to avoid, you know, having the mindset that your life is too busy and you're too full with other things to really just be present in the moment. You know, you should have time for new relationships, time to listen to people, time to talk to people, enough space. So if somebody has anything that's on their mind, anything that they want to talk about, you know, you have the ability to, you know, care about people, to give them respect and to give them an ear, and still have room and time and space for yourself as well. But you know, you can't do that unless you become somewhat comfortable with the notion of understanding that not every single space has to be filled, not every single experience has to be added to your list, and it's okay. It's okay to simplify your life, have a little bit less going on, and, you know, just learn to have peace right where you are with the life that you have. And if there are any blessings that you wish you had in your life, my advice would be this: live your life today as if you already had the blessings that you wish you might have tomorrow. And maybe it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy and all of those things will fall into place. Or maybe they won't, because sometimes not every fairy tale has a happy ending. Maybe things don't work out quite the way you wanted them to. But if you live your life as if you already had all of those blessings, with an attitude of gratefulness, and you are truly comfortable with who you are, you're more likely to wind up having a better life and be more of a blessing to yourself and others along the way anyway, even if things don't work out quite the way you'd planned. So, life has loveliness to sell. Buy it and never count the cost. You know, I remember I used to be so worried about losing my job when I really needed my job. And, you know, the crazy thing is I thought a lot about, what if I say something wrong? What if I do something wrong? And then I lose my job. You know, I try, and when you look at life through that lens of fear, then you have a little bit more of a paralysis and you don't make good decisions, right? You're not comfortable with what you're embarking to do. But now, like, I don't worry so much because I don't have that sense of fear that I used to have. And one side effect of that is I've realized, with a lot less effort and a lot less thought, quite often in my role at work, I wind up doing a much better job because I'm not like that new driver behind the wheel, constantly worried about not going too fast and always worried about staying in the lines and afraid I'm going to crash. Like, you get past that and then you just drive, right? You go where you're going, you don't worry too much about it, and it's not a big deal. And I think that's important. Learn not to view life as a very big deal. Sometimes we wind up having these huge expectations of how life needs to be different. And we're so obsessed, feeling like the stakes are so high, that we live our life in a state of paralysis. Instead of being authentic, we overthink everything. And I think it's important not to do that. Just let your life be what it is. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with other people. Don't worry too much. And sometimes when you try a little bit less, you wind up gaining more. And you do it with less effort, less sacrifice. Just because I guess you're more attractive if you're not trying too hard, right? Like, I always think about the young guys. You see a young guy going to the prom. He's never wore a suit before in his life. He's got this suit on, and maybe it doesn't fit him quite right, but mostly you can tell he's never wore a suit before just because of the awkward way he's stiff and standing up like a pencil, and he's weird looking. And then you see some old businessman on the street corner in a big city with the old worn briefcase and standing there, and probably looks a little bit tired, a little bit like he doesn't want to be bothered, a little bit like he's seen too many Mondays or something. That guy wearing the same suit, but you know what? He looks like he was made for that suit because he's comfortable in it. He's not pretending. He's just himself. And, you know, that's what you gotta be. Stop trying to look for something perfect and just be present and be comfortable with who you are. And a lot of people spend their whole life trying to get there and they never do. So Don't spend your whole life to get there. Don't be that person who spends 3,000 hours grinding in a game just so that you can be bitter about it and angry about it. Because the game sucks, despite the fact that you spent a big part of your life playing it. As always, good luck on your adventure. Till next time, thanks so much for watching.